Looking at live pictures from Yokota Air Base, that's outside Tokyo, Japan, an American air base. President of the United States and his wife boarding Air Force One to fly to Seoul, South Korea for the next leg of his Asia tour. His daughter Ivanka broke off from the trip in Japan to return to the United States to make the case for the Republican tax bill. We're going to talk to her about that in just a minute on this show. But now on to breaking news. It was the deadliest church shooting in American history. Police still putting together all the evidence in the Sutherland Springs, Texas case. Devlin Patrick Kelly murdered 26 people, wounded at least another 20 at the First Baptist Church there. Good evening. Welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. For the latest findings in that investigation, we're joined by Fox correspondent Matt Finn, who is in Texas for us tonight. Matt?
Tucker, we've learned the shooter himself had 3 gunshot wounds to his body, including one to his head, which the medical examiner says was self-inflicted. So the shooter killed himself after his deadly rampage here at this rural Texas church. We've also learned that the shooter recently purchased 4 guns. Authorities say all the sales were legal. There was no information in databases that would have flagged the shooter. And that aligns with 2 pieces of information we learned today. First, Academy Sporting Goods in San Antonio, Texas, released a statement saying it sold 2 guns to the shooter, one in 2016 and one in 2017, and that the shooter passed the National Criminal Background Check, and that sporting goods store is now cooperating with law enforcement. Also, the U.S. Air Force did not submit the shooter's criminal records to the FBI as required by Pentagon law. This shooter was discharged from the Air Force for bad behavior for beating his wife and his stepson, intentionally cracking his stepson's skull. He was court-martialed and in prison. So had the Air Force turned that information over to the FBI, the shooter might not have been able to pass the background checks to purchase guns recently. The Air Force has launched a review into how the service handles the shooter's criminal records. And tonight, at this hour, there are still 15 people in the hospital with wounds related to yesterday's shooting. 5 of them are minors. Some are still in critical condition. Tucker, back to you.
What a gruesome and awful story. Matt, thank you very much. Matt Finn from Texas. Investigators are able to find a lot about the Sutherland Springs shooter, Devin Patrick Kelly, almost immediately. Why were they able to put the pieces together in this case so fast, while in Las Vegas, now a month old, we still know so little? For answers to that question and others, we turn now to NYPD officer and Secret Service agent Dan Bongino, who joins us live. So, Dan, first to the Texas shooting. Apparently, the Air Force did not, as you just heard Matt Finn report, enter this information about this man's court-martial and conviction and the year he spent in the brig into the criminal database that gun purchasers are run through. If they had put that information in there, would he have been prohibited from buying a gun?
Yeah, he would have been prohibited from buying a gun, Tucker, and this is why the radical left can't possibly win this gun control debate. I mean, Tucker, think about the argument they're making to us, right? The argument they're making to us is, oh, don't worry, government can protect you. Listen, I love our military. God bless every man and woman that serves, but this was clearly a bureaucratic error that cost people their lives by officials in our government. As they're making the very same argument, by the way, that we need new laws, despite the fact that the old laws didn't work because people in the government that are supposed to make new laws didn't cooperate with the laws we have now. And look at what we have on our hands. But yes, he would have been stopped from buying a gun, and he wasn't. And look what happened.
Right. And you see that with so many of our gun laws that are unenforced, including in the city of Chicago, where straw purchases are almost never prosecuted, even as they complain that they're a source of the problem, which they certainly are. Why do we know so much, and thank heaven we do, about this atrocity and still so little about the one that happened in Las Vegas more than a month ago?
Well, this tragedy here, this fits the models we have from my experience in the Secret Service of targeted violence, where you've seen indicators in the past. We're seeing, you and I have talked about the Vegas shooting on multiple appearances here, and we said it doesn't make any sense because where are all the witnesses? Where are all the people coming out saying, I saw something on Facebook that was strange. He said something at the local deli that was unusual. Where are they? The answer is nowhere. Nobody's found them yet, or they're there and we just don't know about them. But in this case, we're seeing a litany of people come out and say, oh, there were odd Facebook posts. There's obviously a pattern of violent behavior. And as I've said repeatedly, when you look at models of targeted violence, Tucker, there's always a trail. Always a trail. It's very rare, like in the Vegas shooting, where there's almost nothing there and it's a vacuum.
So you don't think the investigation is different, but the crime is different. The perpetrator is different.
Yeah, I mean, this guy seems to fit the pattern of people who go out there and targeted violence, assassinations, school shootings, homicidal maniacs like this who decide to go into church. And we don't know the motive yet, but it appears there's some connection there. It appears that his desire to take out revenge or whatever it may have been on a family member or an in-law, he just uses violence as a way to, show his power. And that's what he did. He took out 20-plus innocent people in his rampage there. But that fits the models we've seen in the past.
Yes. What are the lessons for the rest of us of this?
Tucker, it pains me to say this, but churches are inherently vulnerable places. You have the right to protect yourself. There are wolves out there. There's a big conflict of visions, if I can steal a line from Thomas Sowell here. The left seems to believe that we can somehow legislate the evil out of people's hearts. You won't. Do not be a sheep. If you are a church, if you are a synagogue, you are in a uniquely vulnerable spot. It pains me to say that, but we live in a different time. You have an ingress, an exit, and an entrance point in the back. Therefore, everybody comes out of the same spot. Right. Tucker, where's everybody's attention in church? Ahead. Where's the shooter going to come in? He's going to come in the back. You also have the lack of cover or concealment. There's nowhere to hide. Why? Because people don't hide in church. They have to see what's going on in the altar. There's nowhere to go. It doesn't give me any joy in telling you that, but in 12 years as a Secret Service agent, if you were in a church or a house of worship, you have an obligation now to realize that we live in a different world. It's sad. These are black swan events. But the penalty for being involved in a black swan event like this is death. This has happened multiple times. You have to secure and harden up your location. I'm sorry I had to say that, but it is absolutely true in the times we live in.
Dan Bongino, thanks a lot for that, as always.
Yes, sir.
Voters in Virginia elect a new governor tomorrow. It's been the most widely covered political race of the year and by far the most bitter. Virginia is solidly blue now, and Democrat Ralph Northam has long been expected to win an easy victory in a place where the Republican president is even less popular than he is in the rest of the country. But that is not what has happened. Republican Ed Gillespie has remained surprisingly close in the polls for months. Panicked, the Democratic establishment and their gophers in the national media have done what they always do in a pinch. They make it about race. Remember when Obama and his campaign told us that Bill Clinton was a racist during the 2008 primaries? Remember when the Hillary Clinton campaign said the same thing about Bernie Sanders just last year? When the going gets tough, Democrats charge racism. So naturally, Ed Gillespie has been transformed into Bull Connor for the purposes of this election. Just yesterday, the New York Times ran a strikingly dishonest piece that accused Gillespie of running, quote, a racially tinged divisive campaign. According to the New York Times, Gillespie's sins include attacking the Salvadoran street gang MS-13, opposing sanctuary cities, and criticizing Governor Terry McAuliffe's unilateral decision to restore voting rights to felons in the state. For this, Ed Gillespie is a bigot. Now, it would be amusing if it wasn't so poisonous. Ed Gillespie isn't a racist. If anything, he's too liberal for many Republicans in Virginia. A former corporate lobbyist from New Jersey, Gillespie has establishment views on virtually everything. He's strongly pro-immigration. He supports amnesty for DACA beneficiaries. He's never made race an issue in this campaign. He promised to crack down on MS-13 because it's a deadly criminal force with thousands of members, which, by the way, and not incidentally, targets almost exclusively Salvadoran immigrants. He made an issue at his sanctuary cities because they fuel the rise of MS-13 and they mock America's laws. He made an issue out of felon voting rights because it was a naked political power grab by the Democratic governor. These aren't racial issues except in delusional Acela corridor newsrooms. Don't tell that to Politico, though. Its reporters accuse Gillespie of adopting, quote, racially charged culture war issues for daring to oppose monument vandalism and national anthem protests. Think Progress ran this headline, quote, Gillespie's campaign's final push for votes plays on hatred of black NFL protesters, end quote. Standing up for the national anthem is now white nationalism. The irony is there actually was racial demagoguery in this campaign, a lot of it, but it didn't come from Ed Gillespie or his supporters. In the closing days, supporters of Northam ran an ad suggesting that Ed Gillespie's voters wanted to murder minority kids. That's not a partisan interpretation of it. The ad actually said that. It showed a white man in a pickup truck with a Gillespie sticker trying to run over a bunch of kids, including a little Muslim girl, as they fled for their lives. The New York Times didn't even mention that ad until graph 14 of its hit piece on Gillespie yesterday. The ad got in the way of their storyline, apparently. Like all off-year elections, tomorrow's results will be scrutinized for larger lessons about American politics. You're going to hear people say the vote was a referendum on Trump, and to some extent that's true, it was. But it will also be a test of the Democratic Party's worst and most dangerous habit, inflaming racial fears to get voters to the polls. Does that tactic still work? Let's hope not. We'll find out tomorrow. Juan Williams co-hosts The Five right here on Fox, and he joins us tonight. Hey, Juan.
Hey, how are you, Tucker?
So, you know Ed Gillespie. Everyone in Washington knows Ed Gillespie. And whatever you think of his politics, he's hardly a bigot. He's a moderate guy politically and by temperament. And so I just look at this with my jaw open and think, if they're turning Ed Gillespie into a bigot for attacking MS-13, then, like, the word has no meaning anymore. That's my reaction to it.
Well, you know, I like Ed Gillespie a lot. I knew him when he was chair of the Republican National Committee, and he was always a guy about inclusion and outreach to minorities. He saw that as the future of the party. But I must say that I was listening to you, I was thinking to myself, I think Ed has found himself in a tight spot after a primary race in which he was running against Corey Stewart, who was Donald Trump's campaign manager in Virginia. And Stewart ran a campaign that was all about the Confederate statues and keeping them in place. He made a very strong populist and at times racial appeal that brought him almost, I think it was less than 2 points, with close to Ed Gillespie in that primary race for the nomination. And now Ed has done things like what you have just laid out, the NFL players kneeling, the Confederate statues, and I think most of all, somehow conflating MS-13 with immigration, and started those ads in the southwestern part of the state, you know, down in Roanoke and the more rural
I don't
areas.
Understand what you mean. I mean, I guess I would just make 2 points. One, MS-13 is a real thing. It's an actual phenomenon.
It's not the state. Well, it's not as big a threat as you would think by seeing the commercials.
Do you know who it's a threat to, though? Is Salvadoran immigrants.
I agree with you.
All the way to El Salvador to report on this.
That's fine, but that's not who the ads are aimed at. The ads are stirring up white anger.
But you don't need to be white to be angry about the fact that our immigration policy has allowed a lot of people to come here illegally and join street gangs.
I agree with you.
So there's nothing, and by the way, their victims are immigrants. So, like, I don't know, why is that racist to say that? It's true.
No. It's not. You're right. There's a real issue, especially, I mean, these people kill each other, so they're Salvadorans killing Salvadorans. But it ties into, and this goes back to the Trump playbook, which is immigration is a threat. It's perceived as a threat by lots of working class white voters. I think you've spoken to me about this. And so what it does is, by playing this up in an ad, it stirs that base that wasn't going to go to the Ed Gillespie you described as a moderate Republican.
Well, look, I disagree with Ed Gillespie's views on immigration very strongly.
Okay.
So, but because I'm way to the right of him in immigration, because it actually is a threat. It's a great thing in other ways, but in some ways it is a threat. And MS-13 is one manifestation of that. It's real, and there's nothing racist about saying that. And if we make that off limits, if we call people names for telling the truth, then we can't have an honest conversation about it.
Oh, no, I want an honest conversation, but I'm telling you, it's not a threat to the extent that it would become the major issue in the race for governor of Virginia, unless you are playing it in order to stir up and turn out your voters, which is what Ed has done.
Okay,
he is following the Corey Stewart, Donald Trump playbook.
They ran an ad, his opponents, accusing him and his voters of wanting to murder children with a pickup truck. No, that's literally true, and that's not like my spin on it. I mean, that's what. Have you seen the spot? Of course.
Of course.
And yet somehow Ed Gillespie, who is a victim of that ad, he's the bigot for some reason because he doesn't like MS-13. Do you see why this is actually insane? And it's making people vote for Ed Gillespie. The attacks on Gillespie are so unfair that I think a lot of people who wouldn't vote for Gillespie are thinking, you know what, this is nutty, and I'm voting for Gillespie to show that I don't like it.
No, I think the dynamic, the political dynamic, is one that Steve Bannon, you know, the Trump political advisor of old now, said, you know, this is the playbook. This is how Ed Gillespie has gotten himself back in the race, by highlighting things like MS-13 and immigration. It is a political play to a racial base, Tucker.
But they accused him of wanting to murder minority children. I mean, if that's not racial demagoguery, is that not racial demagoguery? I mean, like, what's the definition of it if that isn't?
Let me just tell you, this is not racial demagoguery. When you go into Latino communities and Muslim communities and see the anxiety that has been stirred by the kind of appeals that came from Trump, and now Corey
but not
Stewart.
By this ad saying actually they want to murder your children with a pickup truck. That doesn't heighten anxiety, though.
It's a nightmare of anxiety
that's depicted in the ad. So they'll vote for us. I get it.
Well,
people should be ashamed of that. I think that ad.
I think playing racial politics is unnecessary, but I don't think you can deny that that's what's going on in this campaign.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I just think you know what I think. Juan, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Tucker.
Donna Brazile has exposed massive and real misconduct by the Democratic Party. She's a Democrat. She ran the Democratic Party, actually. So why are the media trying to downplay her story? It's a fascinating tale of establishment collusion, and we'll tell it to you with a former Hillary Clinton advisor. Next.